the Chasidic son-in-law of the smith of Dobromysl. Turning to his own family affairs, the smith went on with a twinkle in his eye. I must say that my third son-in-law is going to secure for me a share of the Sharabar, for through my other two sons-in-law I am assured of my share in the Levyazan. The third son-in-law was named Yitzchak Shal. He was a fine young man, and the smith was indeed very pleased with the husband of his youngest daughter, not only because of his education, but on account of the goodness of his heart. In addition, the smith felt greatly gratified that in spite of his rabbinical diplomas, Yitzchak Shal had announced that he wanted to follow his father-in-law's calling and become a smith like him. He gladly taught him the trade, and Yitzchak Shal took it so readily that in a very short time he was able to procure for him a smithy in a village some miles away, where he and his wife were soon to settle down. At the moment, Yitzchak Shal was away at the house of the Duke, whose carriage was brought to us for repair. And what a carriage! You ought to see it when the Duke goes riding in it harnessed to 6 horses. It was quite a big repair job we had to do, and Yitzchak Shal has just taken it back after we spent 3 days getting it in order again. The Duke is so proud of this carriage, which he brought from abroad. Suddenly, a piercing scream came from the smithy, and both Eliezer Reuven and Baruch rushed inside to see what was the matter. They found a terrified peasant near the anvil with smoke from his smoldering clothes enveloping him all around. They quickly threw a rug around him, putting out the flames, applied something to relieve his burns, and finally calmed the poor man. As they were thus occupied, a tall, handsome young man walked in, looking surprised at the scene before him. He placed a bag in front of the smith, saying, "Here is the money for the repair of the Duke's carriage. What has happened here?" "Let me introduce you to my dear friend Baruch," said the smith, proudly presenting his youngest son-in-law to his friend. The two young men looked at each other approvingly as they shook hands. "This poor peasant was set on fire by a spark," explained the smith in answer to his previous question. "In that case," quickly put in Yitzchak Shal, "the Mishnah tells us that if a spark shoots forth from under the hammer and causes damage, we are liable." Yitzchak Shal then proceeded to expound at length the view and legal decision of the Rambam on this point of law. Baruch saw that Yitzchak Shal was a learned young man as well as of fine character and handsome, and altogether he felt very attracted to him and interested to learn all about his past history. Baruch discovered that he had for the first time come in direct contact with one who called himself a Chassid, follower of the Baal Shem Tov. For so Yitzchak Shal introduced himself to Baruch. He told him that he came from Harki, where his father, Rabbi Nissen, was a Melamed, but he was unlike other Melamdim in that his pupils were young men who were already advanced students, showing an especial aptitude for learning. Rabbi Nissen himself was a pupil of the Maggid of Harki, Rabbi Yisrael Yosef, who was an ardent follower and disciple of the Baal Shem Tov. Rabbi Yisrael had formed a group of chosen young men to whom he expounded the new teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, and whom he trained in that spirit. Rabbi Nissen became one of the leaders of this group, and during the various absences of Rabbi Yisrael Yosef, Rabbi Nissen took over the role of head in his place. So it was that Yitzchak Shal was brought up in this Hasidic atmosphere, and knew so much about the great founder of Hasidism, the Baal Shem Tov. Baruch was fascinated as Yitzchak Shal told him more and more about this new way of life. He saw that in Yitzchak Shal he had a living example of the type of Jew the Baal Shem Tov was striving to produce, a true Torah-loving Jew with a love for his fellow beings. Baruch had also met the two other sons-in-law of Eliezer Reuven, the older one, Rabbi Zalman Meir, and the younger one, Rabbi Moshe Leib. He was greatly impressed by their extensive learning, but when he studied the three sons-in-law as they sat together in the smith's house during Pesach, he could not help observing the marked differences between the cheerfulness of the Chassid Yitzchak Shal and the earnestness of his brothers-in-law, the Misnagdim. When they discussed the Gemara, they did so very seriously, always seeking to find the din. Yitzchak Shal, however, always seemed concerned to find the fairest solution to a problem, and to solve it according to the ways of Chassidus. He often managed to find a practical message even in the abstract Talmudic discourses. While they were all admirable in their way, Baruch found that Yitzchak Shal's approach and way of life in general appealed to him most. In his excursions into the woods and the fields which he loved so much, Baruch spent his time in serious reflection, pondering on the mystery of life and on the purpose of God's creation, and especially insofar as it affected the greatest of God's creatures, man. Baruch reflected that in providing man with his necessities, the Almighty had made some things more easily obtainable than others. The greater the need, the easier the effort. Man's first necessity was air. This could be had by all, without difficulty. It was all around one. The second need for man's existence was water. This too could be found with more or less effort. But the third requirement to keep one alive, and which gave most trouble, was that of bread. Because of the sin of Adam and Chava in Gan Eden, man was cursed by the sweat of your brow shall you eat bread. Sweat of your brow shall you eat bread. And ever since man has had to struggle to obtain the necessities of life. But what of man's soul? So far we have spoken of the needs of the body. Baruch felt that his faith and the customs and precepts he had absorbed in his youth, which found expression in his religious observances, requiring almost no effort, were like air to his soul. Torah study he compared to the water for his soul, into which he dived joyfully to its very depths. But what was the ultimate purpose of it all? How could he best serve the Creator or bring good to his children? Baruch, who was eager to discover the true way of life, realized it was no easy matter.